Conflicts that Shaped Pharaonic Egypt, Lecture 13, The Napatan Kingdom and the Resurgence of Nubia.
King Thutmose I of the 18th dynasty, the man who introduced the true New Kingdom approach to the foreign borders of Egypt, also introduced a new Egyptian policy in Nubia. After extending the Egyptian border far to the south in the region of Kurgus, he consolidated the region apparently by overlaying an Egyptian administration over a local Nubian tribal system. The records of revolt in Nubia under Thutmose II reveal that the region was divided into 5 basic administrative divisions, apparently along local tribal lines. At the same time, the entire region was under the control of the king's son of Kush, the viceroy of Nubia, as we call him, a man whose powers over Nubia mirrored those of the pharaoh in Egypt. In the Egyptian administration of Nubia, the king's son of Kush was assisted by 2 Idenu, 2 deputies, one for the region of Wawat in the north, another for the region of Kush in the south. The viceroy of Nubia was in charge not only of all of the regions south of the First Cataract, south of the city of Aswan in Upper Egypt, but the duties of the viceregal administration could extend north into Egypt and include the old city of Heracleopolis in the second Upper Egyptian nome. Local Nubian rulers could serve both as the chiefs of their own tribal units and administrative regions, as well as serving as Egyptian officials in the Egyptian administration. One man who makes this clear is the ruler of Miram, the region around Aniba, a man named Nefer, whom we know from the reign of Tutankhamun. Nefer was an Egyptian administrator. At the same time, he was a Nubian official. His name, the good ruler, the good administrator, probably belongs to the type of loyalist names that Egyptianized foreigners often adopted. Nefer reveals some of the interesting multiculturalism of Nubia that we saw already in the inscriptions of Chahamau, that man from the dawn of the Middle Kingdom, who refers to himself as the Nubian and is proud to be the brave Nubian who turns around the Theban army in flight, but at the same time is very, very proud of his role in establishing pharaonic authority over Upper Egypt, Nubia, and ultimately all of Egypt. Nefer appears in scenes from his tomb in Egyptian garb, apparently because these are Egyptian funerary scenes and inscriptions that are depicted there, and Egyptian garb is considered appropriate for this evocation of an Egyptian afterlife. However, in scenes of a great durbar, in scenes of a great celebration of Nubian authority under Tutankhamun, at the time of the investiture of Tutankhamun's viceroy of Nubia, a man named Hui, in the tomb of Hui at Thebes, we see Nefer taking part in this great durbar. And there he wears a composite outfit made up of Egyptian clothing and Nubian garb, essentially overlaid over that. By wearing these dual outfits, as we see on Nefer, and as we see occasionally thereafter in other Egyptian durbars, we see the Egyptian approach to their foreign territories, whereby local administrators exist within their own administrative or tribal units for their own native population, but at the same time carry out another role within the Egyptian administration. By wearing this dual composite uniform, Nefer's role and the roles of others of his type can be easily interpreted both by those who are more familiar with the Nubian administration and those more familiar with Egyptian administration. Following the death of Ramses XI, Nubia is somewhat split from Egypt. After the defeat of Pa-Nehesi, we do not know exactly what happens south of Aswan, at least not very clearly. In the north, General Payank becomes high priest of Amun and viceroy, uniting the highest religious, military, and administrative titles in Egypt, and becoming de facto ruler of Upper Egypt, even while Ramses XI rules from the north, even while General Payank acknowledges Ramses XI as his overlord and pharaoh. During the 21st dynasty, we have a division of Egypt into the north and south. A senior pharaoh rules in the north, based at Tanis, the successor capital to Piramessa Khantir, due to the silting up of the Pelusiac branch of the Nile and the resulting move of the capital to the Tanite branch. A high priest of Amun is in charge of both religious and secular matters at Thebes. During the course of the 21st dynasty, some of these high priests of Amun adopt royal titles and appear to become junior rulers in the north, moving from Thebes to an area in Middle Egypt called El Hibba. Ultimately, this creates trouble. The delta-based pharaohs of the time of the 21st through the 24th dynasties, the period Egyptologists sometimes call the Third Intermediate Period, although that title isn't exactly fair. The delta-based pharaohs of this period were apparently, at least most of them, Egyptianized Libyans. They are the descendants of those same Western tribes whom the Egyptians had fought during the Ramessid period, the Libyans defeated by Merneptah, and those defeated under Ramses III did not simply vanish. Many of those invaders wound up settling in northern Middle Egypt and the Delta, wound up being incorporated into the Egyptian military, etc. Despite their early military failures, the Libyans successfully settled in the western Delta and took advantage of the civil strife at the end of the 20th dynasty to appoint pharaohs from their own tribes without further bloodshed. We saw how the 21st dynasty robbed the royal tombs officially with the help of Budekh Amun and his associates. Ultimately, with a chief ruler in the north and an under-ruler of the south at El Hibba and a high priest at Thebes, the 21st dynasty does get Egypt back on her feet after the long, drawn-out death of the late Ramessid period. The final official robbing of the royal tombs and reburial of the royal mummies appears to occur near the end of the 21st dynasty. And as one might expect, now having improved the economy and now having run out of material in the treasury in the place of truth, the Valley of the Kings, the 22nd dynasty is able to seek foreign conquest and foreign loot, and indeed the first ruler of the 22nd dynasty, Sheshonq I, the Shishak of the Bible, invades Syria-Palestine, taking as his pretext the war between the sons of Solomon. This promise of a new beginning, of a newer new kingdom, however, does not work. The 22nd dynasty ultimately weakens to the extent that the 23rd and 24th dynasties carve out their own pieces of 22nd dynasty territory. The problem that causes this dividing of power between the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th dynasties is apparently the Libyan background of the rulers in these dynasties. Rather than desiring to see a single dynastic line, the 22nd dynasty sees its own royal line splitting into the 23rd and ultimately 24th dynasties. Apparently a power-sharing system whereby the royal power is divided up between collateral descendants is something probably going back, although we cannot be certain, probably going back to Libyan tribal society. The 22nd dynasty sees ultimately war in the Thebaid, with eventually the 23rd dynasty based at Leontopolis splitting off, with the 22nd dynasty still holding the old capital of Memphis and the rest of the Delta with part of Middle Egypt. The 23rd dynasty ultimately takes control of Thebes as well. In the end, a man named Tefnacht, formerly part of the 22nd dynasty, breaks away under the penultimate ruler of that dynasty and establishes himself as ruler of the 24th dynasty in the West Delta, the former chiefdom of the Libu, becoming great ruler of the West. All the time that these Libyan rulers of Egypt are dividing their power amongst collateral dynasties in the north, the growing empire of Assyria in northern Mesopotamia is on the move and soon knocking at the door of the eastern delta. Some solution and some redress to this threat ultimately comes from the far south out of Nubia. Although Nubia appears in some titles of the early Third Intermediate period in Upper Egypt, we have no indication that this is anything other than something honorary. Around the Fourth Cataract in Nubia, during the 10th and 9th centuries BCE, local rulers were buried at the site of El Kuru. Sheshonq I, along with his military activity in Syria-Palestine, also mounts a campaign into Nubia. By a century after Sheshonq's activity in Nubia, some sort of local kingdom has been formed. The mother, if we may call her that, of the Napatan state is probably a queen named Katimala. She left an inscription in late Ramessid hieroglyphic style on the facade of the old New Kingdom Egyptian temple at the fortress of Semna in the Second Cataract. A proper reading of the text suggests that Katimala took over from a male ruler, perhaps her own husband, after his defeat at the hands of some rapacious enemy. She, and this is important, with the help of Amun, then triumphs. The first part of her inscription records the speech by His Majesty to the king's great wife, the daughter of the king Katimala, the Vindicated. And he says, quote, "Where are we to turn if we do not serve among the servants of Amun, when there is an opponent? Otherwise, the thing that happens every year will occur to us. Otherwise, it will go badly for them, the servants of Amun. Otherwise, it will happen to us. When there is a chieftain who has robbed gold and silver and treated Amun as accursed, the one who exalted me. But the enemy escaped." The queen responds to this sort of woe is me pronouncement of the king. Even though the king has apparently given up, he doesn't know what to do, he still seems to feel that he must serve Amun. And one of the bad things his enemy has done is treated Amun as accursed. And the queen responds, "What I did was act as servant of Amun. I did not think about the event which happened to me this year, apparently some bad things, since I have trusted in Amun, who attacks him who robbed gold and silver. He whom my fathers, to whom I have succeeded, he whom my fathers appointed, hastened to me after he had failed. The word is wia, just been rendered senseless, unable, incompetent. And I did it. I succeeded in the mountains of gold. For it was that year I achieved the understanding. Powerful is the magic of God. With this crusading faith in the god Amun, Katimala's successors ultimately unite Upper Egypt with Nubia into an Upper Nilotic state and go on what amounts to a crusade against the weak Libyan rulers in the north, whom these southern sons of Amun appear to see as collaborators with the evil Asiatics, with the Assyrians. Although Nubia is often supposed to have been at best thinly populated from about 1100 to 750 BCE, such a condition is much to be doubted and probably results from a misreading of the archaeological record. Settlements may have dwindled, as they did in the late Old Kingdom, in favor of a nomadic or semi-nomadic lifestyle, although the Amun temple at Gebel Barkal appears to have remained in use. An apparent association of the remaining urban folk of Nubia, much reduced in numbers, with the Temple of Amun, may go far to explaining the intensity of feeling and expressions of loyalty to Amun that fill so many of the inscriptions of the Nubian rulers who come after Katimala, the rulers who form the 25th dynasty, whom we refer to sometimes as the Napatan kings, based as they were at their capital city of Napata in the south. Before his death in 747 BCE, the Nubian ruler Kashta, a descendant of Katimala apparently, extends Nubian rule down the Nile just after the end of the reign of Osorkon III, during the middle of the reign of Takelot III of the 23rd dynasty, and sets up a stela to the god Khnum on the island of Elephantine, the traditional border between Egypt and Nubia. Kashta may well have established close relations with Thebes. Certainly his god is the Theban Amun, the same god whom Katimala and her less fortunate predecessor worshipped, a god well known from the earlier New Kingdom Egyptian temples in Nubia. By the 8th year of the reign of Takelot III of the 23rd dynasty, Nubia's king is the son of Kashta, a man named Pia. Within his first decade, Pia establishes control over Thebes and sets up major fortified garrisons in Upper Egypt. One of these, a major fortress just south of Edfu on the east bank in Upper Egypt. Around this time, at least one Libyan ruler of Middle Egypt, Nimlat of Hermopolis, probably joined Pia about this time, since Pia later considered him to have defected to Tefnacht in the western delta. At Gebel Barkal, great seat of Amun in Nubia, Pia set up a stela in which he recorded that Amun of Napata had granted him the rule of all lands and the power to make and unmake rulers. And Amun of Thebes specifically granted him the rule over Egypt. At Thebes, Pia sets up his sister Armenierdas I as the god's wife of Amun-elect, and has her adopted by Shepenwepet I, daughter of the northern king Osorkon III. Thebans at the time appear to have dated by Takelot III and Pia with the names of the two divine adoratresses. Between about 745 and 732 BCE, Pia sweeps north, just at the time when the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser is coming in from the northeast onto the border of Egypt at Gaza. Pia maintains his sister Amenartis I as God's wife. Tefnacht of the 24th dynasty in the Western Delta and a coalition of Delta rulers come against Pia during his regnal years 19 and 20. Pia sends troops north who fight near Heracleopolis in Middle Egypt. In 728 BC, Pia celebrated the New Year's festival in Napatan, then moved north to celebrate the Great Opet festival at Thebes before heading down the Nile to deal with Tefnacht and his Delta coalition. Nimlat of Hermopolis, who apparently formally acknowledged Pia as overlord, surrendered to Pia ultimately after a siege in which Pia constructed a circumvallation wall and siege platform. Pia was furious with Nimlat for allowing the horses in Hermopolis to starve during the siege. Having relieved Heracleopolis, Pia then took Memphis. On his victory stela, Pia recounts how he summoned a council of war. Just as in the old royal novel style, one group advises caution, a long siege. The other, however, suggests something more drastic. Quote, "Make a ramp against her. Let us raise the ground to her ramparts and tie together a platform. Let us set up masts and set sail from the border against her." What the second group advises is a combined land and river assault. They refer to tying together a platform, constructing a wooden and earthen ramp or platform, just as we see in depictions of the Assyrian siege of Lachish and just as we read of in the siege of Plataea and in Caesar's siege works at Avaricum. We know from the earlier fortress of Buhan that the water walls of cities and fortresses along the Nile were often less well fortified than the land walls, because Egypt fully intended always to control the Nile. This is certainly the situation with the Theodosian walls of Constantinople, for instance. The walls on the side of the Golden Horn, where the Byzantine fleet would lie and anchor, protected by the chain stretched across the mouth of the Horn from the Tower of Galata across the Horn from Constantinople. What Pia's advisors recommend is precisely what happened at Constantinople in 1208 of our era. In that year, the Venetian fleet, in the company of the Fourth Crusade, attacked Constantinople. After capturing Galata Tower and lowering the great chain across the mouth of the Golden Horn, the Venetian ships sailed into the Horn, set up the spars, the antennae of their galleys, as scaling ladders, and sailed the tops of these over against the weakest walls of the city, those opposite the naval arsenal. Remarkably, Pia and some of his advisors appear to have thought of the same thing during the siege of Memphis. Pia orders the attack and admonishes, "Enter the houses over the water." So we in fact know the strategy was understood and intentional. Pia, in all of his attacks, saw himself as the vicar of Amun, coming to rescue Egypt and the collaborating northerners from the enemies of Amun and from the wretched Asiatics. Uput II of the 23rd dynasty at Leontopolis submitted to Pia during his regnal year 21. Osar Khan IV, representing the now much diminished 22nd dynasty, submitted to Pia at the old capital of Tanis. Tefnacht of the now sole surviving 24th dynasty sent emissaries in an attempt to appease Pia. Tefnacht does not humble himself, and interestingly enough, Pia does not force the matter. One may suggest that with Assyria at the door of Egypt, Pia did not want to remove a potential force for unity in the Delta, even if that potential force were inimical to the Nubian 25th dynasty. With Tefnacht still in place, the worst-case scenario would be that the Delta would become a buffer state of sort between the 25th dynasty in the south and Assyria. In year 21, Pia erected his great informative victory stela in rather archaizing Middle Egyptian language at the site of Napatan. After Pia returned to his southern home base, Tefnacht, as one might predict, from 728 to about 720 BCE, emerges as the northern power, ultimately ruling from Memphis and the apex of the Delta to the north. Pia is followed on the throne of the 25th dynasty by the rulers Shabaka, Shabitku, Taharka, and Tanwatamani. Shabaka reinvaded Egypt and actually burned his northern foe alive. A surviving seal of Shabaka's found at Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, suggests that he actually corresponded with the Assyrian ruler Sennacherib. Shabitku sent his son Taharka with a force against Assyria, and they certainly discomfited Sennacherib and the Assyrian forces at the Battle of El Teka in 701 BC, although they cannot be said actually to have won that battle. In 690 BCE, Taharka came to the throne of the 25th dynasty. Although the first half of his reign was peaceful, the second half is full of war with Assyria. As the 22nd dynasty was no more, Taharka moved his capital to Tanis and began an aggressive military policy. He attempted to build a buffer state in Syria-Palestine and secured timber once again from Lebanon. He may have instigated a failed revolt of Sidon against Esarhaddon of Assyria. That at least is what Esarhaddon thought. He captured Abdi-Milkute of Sidon in 677 BCE and beheaded him the following year. Esarhaddon marched to Syria and began a trade embargo of Egypt. Esarhaddon attempted to invade Egypt directly in 674 BCE, but his forces were defeated by Taharka. Esarhaddon invaded again 3 years later in 671 BCE, and this time Taharka fled to the south, even leaving some members of his own family to be captured by the Assyrians at Memphis. With the departure of the Assyrian forces, Taharka returned to the north. Esarhaddon attempted another invasion in 669 BCE, but died en route. In 667-666 BCE, Ashurbanipal attacked as far as Thebes, and Taharka fled to the south. Local rulers then submitted to the Assyrians, these including Necho I of Sais and Mantu Imhat, the governor at Thebes. Even Nespamedu, the local governor of Aswan, acknowledged Assyrian suzerainty. When Ashurbanipal left, the Delta rulers attempted intrigue with Taharka. Discovered by the Assyrians, many were dispatched to Nineveh, and executions occurred at Sais, Mendes, Pelusium, and elsewhere. Ashurbanipal then killed all of the rulers sent to Nineveh, except for Necho and his son Psamtik. The Assyrian ruler appointed Necho to be ruler of Sais and Memphis, and Psamtik, having been given the Assyrian name Nabu Shazibani, is made ruler of Athribis in the Delta. Taharka, perhaps ill at this time and certainly much chagrined, appointed his nephew Tanutaman as successor. The succeeding 26th dynasty, the so-called Saite dynasty, proscribed the name of Taharqa and erased it from all the monuments they could find because of his policies, apparently, and because of the perception that he had led the Assyrians in his flight into Thebes. But Hakorus, a ruler of the late 29th dynasty, in his bark shrine at Karnak, actually makes allusion to Taharqa. Taharqa was now no longer anathema for Hakorus because, in fact, prior to Hakorus himself, Taharqa was the last major builder at Karnak. Tanutaman, the son of Shabitku, claims in the so-called Dream Stela that the god Amun gave him all of Egypt as his territory and granted victory over Assyria. In a counterattack towards the north, he actually captured Memphis and marched into the delta against Necho and Psamtik, those two collaborators with the Assyrians. Tanutaman appears to have killed Necho, but Psamtik was able to flee. Nabushazibani made it to the Assyrians for protection. Interestingly, on his stela, Tanutaman appears to quote a section out of the old royal novel of Kamoza, describing the Delta officials whom Tanutaman sees as being like the young of Inehu animals, perhaps these birds or whatever they are, the same term, the same passage as Kamoza uses to describe the women of the Hyksos looking out from the fortress at Avaris. Apparently a literary allusion intended to compare the 25th dynasty's northern enemies to the Hyksos enemies of the 17th dynasty earlier. The Delta rulers, under one Pekrur of Pisoped, offer allegiance to Tanutaman. The Assyrians, under the supervision of Psamtik, whom they no doubt trust with the mellifluous name of Nabushazibani, then invaded Egypt in 664, 663, and captured Memphis. Like Taharqa before him, Tanutaman fled to Thebes, the Assyrians in pursuit. Like Taharqa before him, Tanutaman fled to the south, and this time the Assyrians sack Thebes and loot many objects, including 2 solid electrum obelisks. Later, the Hebrew prophet Nahum would call down upon Nineveh the fate that had befallen No Amun, the city of Ammon, Thebes, at the hands of the Assyrians. Although the Thebans appear to have continued to date by his reign, Tanutaman and the 25th dynasty were permanently driven back into Nubia.
This ends Lecture 13.